I was halfway through going over the quarterly sales figures when Martin burst into my office without knocking, no warning, no politeness, just a loud, purposeful entrance designed to unsettle me. "Typical Elena," he barked, throwing a file down on my desk. "We need to talk now." I glanced at the folder, then at the man I'd been working under for the past 4 years, Martin Ree, the kind of guy who never gave a second glance to the women in the office unless he needed a coffee run or someone to schedule his day. He craved power, and even more, he loved showing off that he had it. Still, I kept my cool, always did. "Of course," I said, motioning toward the chair across from me. But he didn't sit instead. He just stood there, looming. "The board has decided to shake up the leadership team. We're heading in a new direction. Frankly, we need leaders, not just people who crunch spreadsheets." I blinked, caught off guard for a brief moment. "You're firing me?" He smirked like he'd just sunk the game-winning shot. "Let's not get dramatic. You're being let go, effective immediately. No warning, no performance reviews, and definitely no credit for the fact that your department just posted the highest revenue growth in 3 years." "I see," I said softly. "May I ask why?" His voice cut sharp. "You lack vision. You manage tasks, not people. And let's be honest. This industry demands strong leadership, assertiveness, confidence, traits you haven't exactly shown." There it was, blatant and unhidden, a jab at my gender disguised in corporate buzzwords. He didn't see me as a leader, not because of my results, but because I didn't fit his old-fashioned mold. "I understand," I said evenly, voice steady and neutral. Martin's eyes narrowed. Clearly thrown off by my calm, he'd been expecting anger, maybe tears. But I'd learned long ago how to control my emotions in boardrooms full of inflated egos. "I'll need your badge and company laptop by the end of today," he added. "Access will be cut off by 5 p.m. HR will send you details about your severance." I nodded, stood, and extended my hand. "Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the clarity." He hesitated, then shook it. "Good luck out there." As he turned and strode out, clearly pleased with his little victory, I sat back down and exhaled slowly. My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't quicken. In fact, I felt lighter, because what Martin and everyone else in that building didn't know was that I wasn't just a department head 2 weeks ago. Something big had shifted inside me, and I'd been waiting for the right moment to use it. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk. My father smiling proudly at the ribbon-cutting ceremony when he opened the company's first regional office. The very same company Martin had just shown me the door to. I traced the frame's edge with my fingers. "You told me to wait, Dad. Wait until the moment was right." I stood and began packing up my things. I didn't take much. Just a few personal items, a mug my team had given me last Christmas, and a stack of old notebooks filled with ideas that had never passed Martin's desk outside. The office hummed quietly with curiosity. Some coworkers shot me sympathetic looks. Others avoided my gaze altogether. No one asked questions, but I could read the thoughts on their faces. Did she get fired? What did she do wrong? I left the building with a small, polite smile and no drama. Stepping into the sunlight, I felt the weight of 15 years inside that company lift off my shoulders. They thought they had ended my career, but what they really did was hand me the green light. I pulled out my phone and sent a single message to my lawyer. "It's time, prepare everything." The reply came almost instantly. "Understood. Shareholder meeting can be scheduled within 5 business days." I looked back at the glass building, gleaming in the sun. Martin thought it was over. He had no clue what was coming next. The next time I walked into that boardroom, it wouldn't be as an employee, it would be as their majority shareholder. And the smile I'd wear that day? That one would be genuine. 2 weeks earlier, I sat alone in the quiet, wood-paneled office of our family attorney, staring at an envelope I wasn't allowed to open until the clock struck midnight on my 30th birthday. Dad had always loved theatrics. He said it made serious things feel significant, and apparently, this was no exception. Elena, Mr. Harrington, our longtime family lawyer, said with a warm, fatherly tone, "Your father left very clear instructions. You're not to open this envelope until your 30th birthday, not a day before." I smiled politely, half curious, half amused. "What is it? Some kind of delayed birthday card?" He gave me a knowing look, as if to say he wasn't about to spoil the surprise. "Your father was a man of vision," he said instead, "and he trusted you more than anyone." That sentence stayed with me in the days that followed my father, the founder and former CEO of the very company that had just let me go without ceremony, had always believed in foresight, in planning ahead. And more than that, he believed in me. When he died 5 years ago, the company changed. It grew colder, more calculating, less about people and more about numbers. Martin had joined shortly after, charming the board, flaunting his MBA, and slowly tearing down the culture Dad had built. I stayed on, thinking I could protect what was left. But now I realized Dad had seen this coming. He'd prepared for it. On the morning of my birthday, I opened that envelope alone, sitting in the same spot where Dad used to read the paper every Sunday. Sunlight pouring through the window, a quiet warmth in the air. Inside was a letter and an official document sealed with embossed stamps. I unfolded the letter. First, it was written in Dad's neat handwriting. "Elena, if you're reading this, you've turned 30. That means you're ready." I never doubted it. Not for a second. "You've spent your life working twice as hard for half the recognition." I saw it, even when you thought I didn't. I saw the sacrifices, the late nights, the integrity nobody else noticed. I also saw how the company changed after I left, and I knew there might come a time when you'd need more than a seat at the table. So, I gave you the table. I paused, blinking hard. My hands shook slightly as I turned to the document behind the letter. It was a notarized trust agreement. According to it, 90% of the company shares Dad had held when he stepped down were placed under my name, held until I turned 30, with full voting rights activated immediately. 90%. I read it 3 times, then once more, just to be sure I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't just a shareholder. I was the majority owner, the controlling shareholder. My whole body buzzed with disbelief, adrenaline, and something else. Power. Quiet, measured, undeniable power. I called Mr. Harrington right away. "Is this real?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Yes," he said simply. "Your father set up the trust to avoid any public filings. It's airtight. The board has absolutely no clue unless you decide to tell them. Why didn't he activate it sooner? He wanted you to experience the company on your own terms first, to see who would reveal their true colors, so you could decide if you actually wanted it before you used it." That hit me hard. I'd spent years being underestimated, ignored, talked over in meetings. I'd watched Martin get credit for ideas I'd quietly suggested, and seen male colleagues climb faster despite doing less. I smiled through it all, convinced that patience and hard work would eventually pay off. But now I realized it wasn't time I was missing. It was leverage. And suddenly, I had it. I booked a follow-up with Mr. Harrington for the next day. "Let's discuss what comes next," I said. He didn't hesitate. "We'll prepare the paperwork to call a shareholders meeting and notify the board once everything's ready." "Hold off on telling them," I said. "Not until I say so." There was a pause on the line. "Elena, can I ask what you're planning?" I stared out the window of my apartment, watching the traffic flow by. People rushing, oblivious to the storm about to hit. "I'm planning to walk into that boardroom," I said quietly, "and show them exactly who they tried to fire." I skipped the mandatory exit interview. HR called twice and emailed once. I ignored them all instead. I sat in the quiet corner of a discreet downtown cafe, sipping a flat white, while Mr. Harrington reviewed the final draft of the shareholder meeting request. It was official now on paper. I controlled 90% of the company's voting power, a legal and financial reality Martin would never have seen coming. "You sure you're ready?" Harrington asked, adjusting his glasses as he slid the documents toward me. "Once you file this, you're basically tossing a grenade into their boardroom." I met his gaze, steady and calm. "They pulled the pin the moment they fired me." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." The documents were simple, like most powerful things tend to be: a formal notice for a special shareholder meeting with a single agenda item, leadership review and appointment of new executive management. Martin wouldn't see it coming. That was the whole point. His entire game was built on controlling the room with confidence. He bulldozed meetings with jargon, steamrolled quieter voices, and wielded charm like a weapon when he needed it. The board, mostly older men who loved his bravado, had let him run wild for too long soon. They'd learn how fragile that kind of power really was. "I'll serve notice Friday morning," Harrington said. "Meeting set for Tuesday. That gives them 2 business days to panic." I couldn't help but smile. Perfect. That afternoon, I met with Caroline Winters, the trustee who had managed the shares since Dad passed sharp, discreet, and with a memory like steel. "I've watched that man tear down your father's legacy, brick by brick," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You owe him no politeness." Inside were everything I'd need for Tuesday: ownership certificates, voting records, and a detailed summary of company performance under Martin's watch: declining employee satisfaction, rising turnover, executive perks ballooning, and revenue flattening despite a growing market. "He's been hiding behind inflated projections," Caroline said flatly. "If this keeps up, he'll sink the company in 2 years." I nodded, soaking it all in. Let the numbers do the talking. As I left her office, I passed the hallway mural, an oil painting of Dad standing in front of the company's first headquarters. He looked younger than I'd ever seen him in real life, hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl in a red dress. That was me. He believed in legacy and in people. Even though he wasn't here anymore, I could still feel his hand on my shoulder by Monday morning. Rumors about my sudden disappearance had exploded. Texts from former colleagues flooded in. "What happened? Did you quit?" Martin's acting like nothing's wrong, but HR's tight-lipped "whatever you did, hope you're okay." I didn't reply. Not yet. Silence was part of the plan. I wanted Martin confident, certain he'd erased me from the story. Let him enjoy playing king a little longer. Let him underestimate me one last time. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, trying on the navy suit I'd bought for special occasions but never worn. It was sharp, tailored, and clean. The kind of outfit you wear not to ask for power, but to own it. I rehearsed my lines. Not a speech. Just a few precise, measured sentences. The truth would do most of the work for me. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and clear. The city buzzed as usual, unaware that inside one boardroom, everything was about to shift. I arrived 10 minutes early, walking past the receptionist with quiet confidence. She did a double take, but didn't stop me upstairs. The boardroom lights were on. I could see movement through the frosted glass. Mr. Harrington met me by the elevators, his expression calm, unreadable. "They're in there," he said. "Martin's already talking. He thinks this is just another quarterly strategy review." Not for long. I took a slow breath, smoothed my jacket, and stepped forward. The boardroom door opened with a soft click. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. "And Martin?" Mid-sentence, he froze when he spotted me. "Elena," he said, raising his eyebrows. "This meeting is for board members only." I smiled politely, placing the ownership documents on the table. "Exactly." Then I took my seat at the head of the table. The silence was complete. Martin stared at me across the long oak table, confusion flashing, then disbelief. I could almost see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to shove me back into the box he thought he'd locked me in last week. "Elena," he repeated sharply, "this is a board meeting. Employees aren't allowed." "I'm not here as an employee," I said calmly. "I'm here as the majority shareholder." That one sentence shifted the entire room's energy. Board members exchanged looks. Some stiffened. Others leaned in with interest. Mr. Dalton, who'd been with the company since Dad's days, looked down at the document I'd set before him, then back up with raised eyebrows. "Is this accurate?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "It is," I replied. 90% of the company's shares were transferred to me through a family trust when I turned 30. All paperwork is in order, filed, notarized, and submitted according to corporate governance. Martin glanced between me and Mr. Harrington, who calmly unfolded a copy of the ownership certificate and handed it to the board secretary. "You must be joking," Martin sneered, his voice growing louder with disbelief. "This is absurd. Why on earth would your father do something like this?" "Because he had faith in me," I interrupted firmly, "and because he understood exactly what this company would become without proper oversight." The room fell completely silent. Everyone grasped the meaning behind my words, even though I hadn't said it outright. Since my father's passing, Martin had turned the company's culture toxic. He rewarded blind loyalty instead of competence, style over substance, and the results were showing. "Let's cut to the chase," I said, reaching for the second folder I'd brought. "As the majority shareholder, I'm convening this special meeting to review the current executive leadership team, including the CEO position." Martin stood abruptly, his face flushed red with anger. "This is a hostile takeover, a personal vendetta. You think you can just stroll in here and pull this off?" "I'm not asking for permission," I replied, raising my voice just enough to command attention. "I'm asserting my legal rights." Sliding the financial report across the table, I said, "Let's discuss actual performance." I didn't need to put on a show. The numbers spoke loud and clear. Employee satisfaction had plummeted 38% over 2 years. Turnover in key departments had surged by 47%. 3 formal discrimination complaints were currently under HR investigation. Revenue growth had stagnated in a market that was booming. I had gathered detailed testimony from department heads, employee survey results, and independent audits, plus documented cases of misuse of company funds, unauthorized business travel, inflated executive bonuses, and misleading investor disclosures. I glanced sharply at Martin. "All of this happened under your watch." Board members flipped through the reports with concern. Mr. Dalton looked visibly disturbed. The CFO, who'd been silent until then, leaned over to whisper something to the general counsel, who immediately started typing on his tablet. Martin's jaw tightened in frustration. "You're distorting the facts to make your petty revenge seem legitimate." "There's no distortion," I said firmly. "I have concrete proof. You relied on the assumption that no one with real power would ever challenge you. That assumption ends now." I let the statement hang in the air. "Effective immediately," I said, pulling out the final document. "I'm filing a motion to remove Martin Rhee as CEO. As the majority shareholder, my vote alone is enough to pass this motion." The board secretary looked taken aback. "You don't require a second vote?" "I control 90%, I answered simply. "That's an undeniable majority." Clearing his throat, Mr. Dalton said, "According to company bylaws, the motion stands, effective upon completion of paperwork." Martin slammed his hand down on the table. "You can't pull this off." "I already have." Security wasn't called. Martin didn't resist, but as he stormed out, his face twisted with fury and disbelief, I noticed something striking. He didn't look dominant anymore. He looked small. When the door clicked shut behind him, I took a slow breath and faced the rest of the board. "This company deserves better," I said clearly. So do its people. And starting today, that's exactly what they will receive. Mr. Dalton nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through. Welcome back, Elena. By the week's end, Martin's nameplate was gone from the CEO's office door. I didn't rush to move in. I didn't need a larger desk or corner office to prove my authority. I had a much bigger priority first, rebuilding the soul of the company Dad had founded. The Monday after the shareholders' meeting, I called a company-wide staff meeting in the main conference hall, the same space where Martin had once flaunted sales projections like trophies and handed out empty compliments to the same few executives repeatedly. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Curious, cautious, hopeful. Employees trickled in slowly, whispering softly. The front rows remained empty, as if no one wanted to appear too eager. Some faces showed nervousness, others suspicion. They'd been burned before. I stood alone at the front, no notes, no slides, just speaking honestly. Some of you know me, I began. Some of you only know what you've heard. But let me be clear. I didn't come here to seize power. I came to rebuild trust. Heads tilted, attention sharpened. For years, this company thrived because of its people, your ideas, your late nights, your belief that what we were building mattered. Somewhere along the way, we lost that. I paused to let the silence settle. I was fired last week, I said softly, a small smile tugging at my lips. Told I wasn't what this company needed, that I lacked the leadership to guide us into the future. Nervous chuckles rippled through the room, and the tension began to ease. My openness disarmed them. I didn't argue back, not then, because I knew something Martin never grasped. Leadership isn't about shouting the loudest or chasing vanity. It's about vision, respect, and lifting up the people who actually do the work. I scanned the room, locking eyes with familiar faces. Engineers I'd worked alongside for years, overlooked assistants, junior analysts stuck beneath layers of corporate ego. Starting today, I said firmly, everything changes. Over the next 2 weeks, I did something radical. I listened. I met with department heads, team leads, interns, receptionists, custodial staff. I asked what was broken, what they needed, who deserved more than they were getting. Then I acted. I promoted Maya from customer service to head of client experience, a role she'd unofficially held for a year while her manager took credit. I brought Kevin back, a brilliant product developer who'd quit after repeatedly being passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified men. I completely restructured HR, the complaints gathering dust in forgotten files. I read every single one. Several mid-level managers were quietly let go within the first week, people who had fostered cultures of fear and favoritism under Martin's rule. Then I launched something Dad had dreamed of, the People First Initiative, a fresh internal program to celebrate innovation, reward collaboration, and champion equity, no matter the job title. No more whisper networks, no more glass ceilings. Just good people doing great work, finally getting the credit they deserve. One late night, I walked the empty office halls alone. The energy was different now, softer, warmer, brighter. The break room echoed with laughter again. People stayed late because they wanted to, not out of fear. Desks were decorated once more, photos of family, plants, little touches of personality. Things that had slowly vanished under Martin's reign. In a quiet hallway near the engineering bullpen, I spotted a whiteboard with a message scrawled in blue marker. She came back. 3 simple words, underlined twice. I stood there for a moment, reading those words again and again. Not she took over, not she fired Martin, just she came back. And that phrase carried more weight than any title I now held. The following week, I finally moved into the CEO's office, not because I needed the room, but because the time had come. The nameplate was new, sleek brushed steel with clean, elegant lettering, Elena Wren, Chief Executive Officer. I didn't bring much with me, only a single framed photo. My father and me on the company's opening day, both smiling, both full of hope. I placed it carefully in the corner of the desk and sat down, not feeling like a conqueror, but more like a custodian. This was no longer just my company. It was my responsibility, and I was determined to honor that. Exactly 1 year had passed since the day I was fired. 12 months since I'd walked out of these doors carrying a cardboard box and a polite smile, dismissed as not the right fit. 12 months since Martin stripped me of my title, oblivious to the fact that I held something far more powerful. Now, as I stood again before these glass doors, dressed in a tailored suit with a sleek leather folder tucked under my arm and the full weight of the company's future on my shoulders, I felt something unexpected, not anger, not triumph, but peace. I nodded to the front desk receptionist, who stood immediately as I entered. "Good morning, Miss Wren." "Please, call me Elena." I smiled. "We're all on the same team." The elevator chimed softly as I rode up to the top floor, the space that had once been Martin's domain. Now it belonged to me, but I hadn't redesigned it for show. The original walnut desk remained, along with the broad windows overlooking the city. What had changed were the photos on the walls, images of employees, team retreats, product launches, faces, and moments that had long gone unrecognized. On the far wall, directly behind my chair, hung a large portrait of my father. Not as a monument to him, but as a constant reminder to me. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and began reviewing the quarterly report. It was our strongest quarter in 5 years. Customer satisfaction was up 23%. Employee retention had climbed 41%. Revenue was breaking records. But more than the numbers, what mattered was how we achieved it. Ethically, collaboratively, transparently. The company culture had shifted. People no longer whispered complaints over coffee breaks. They spoke openly and were truly heard. Feedback channels were active. Diversity in leadership had doubled. We hadn't just brought good people in. We'd finally given them room to grow. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. Maya entered, the head of client experience now, her eyes shining even behind her glasses. "Ready?" she asked. "They're waiting in the conference room." I stood and smoothed the front of my blazer. "Let's get started." The boardroom felt different, too. Not in decoration, but in presence. For the first time in company history, half the board were women. Several members were under 40. They brought fresh perspectives, asked tougher questions, and made better decisions. At the center of the table sat Richard Tanica, one of our new strategic advisors. A brilliant mind, a decent heart, the kind of person my father would have trusted. "Before we begin," Richard said, nodding toward me, "Elena has a few words." I hadn't planned to speak, but standing there with every eye on me, not judging, but respectful, I realized this was the moment Dad had prepared me for. "I want to thank you all," I said, "for believing in change, for making the hard decisions when the easy ones would have been safer, and for helping me rebuild a company that puts people before power." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "Someone once told me I lacked leadership," I continued. "But leadership isn't about volume or title. It's about vision, accountability, and the courage to do what's right, especially when it's inconvenient." I smiled, not for show, but genuinely. My father built this company on those values. I'm proud to say we're finally living up to them again. A quiet beat, then applause. Not thunderous, but warm and sincere, the kind that lingers. That afternoon, I took the long way back to my office, walking through each department like I used to when I was just another face in the crowd. I stopped to check in with teams, shared laughs with developers, and high-fived marketing interns who had just pulled off their first big campaign. In the break room, someone had baked cupcakes for an intern's last day. I grabbed one, sat down among them, and talked about nothing important for 20 minutes. Because this wasn't just a company anymore. It was a place where people felt they truly belonged, where more mattered than stock prices or titles or revenge. It was home.